Um, yeah, I think that has now started. Yep, we are recording indeed. So, hello.
Hello.
Just say for the benefit of our students watching this, Jolen was once a student here at what was then West Suffolk College, but is now University Studies, and has very kindly agreed to come back and talk to us virtually about his experience of working in the field of conducting research, which obviously is a subject a lot of students do struggle with. And this is mainly intended to inspire you that you can indeed get jobs in this area, and you don't have to view research as something you endure, but something you can gain from. So I will pass over to Jolen to add to an introduction.
I think it's probably worth clarifying at the beginning what kind of research I do. Because in the social sciences, the word research is banded around quite a lot. And I think, particularly when you're studying, you get perhaps a false idea of what research is, or at the very least, you kind of get stuck in a particular niche of it. So what the area I work in is essentially in the corporate world. I work in something called corporate governance, I suppose you could call it, which is the idea that there is a regulatory body surrounding the actions and behaviours of corporations to make sure that they behave in keeping with societal norms. So it's not that I work in psychological research or even sociological research, but instead this is an area which I would say exists in parallel with both.
Excellent. So in terms of, you've had, this is your second job directly involving forms of research. Do you want to say a few words about?
I would say third. It's my third
okay.
really in the world that I'm in. So if I perhaps give you some background, what I did after I left Bury St Edmunds. So I did my psychology sociology joint honours at Bury. Then I went on to do a master's in sociology at Essex. While I was there, so at the Essex campus, they have the Institute for Social and Economic Research. And I was a research assistant there while I was doing my master's towards the tail end of it. So that was social research as the students probably expect to hear it. That was working on an income survey. At the time, they were creating a new survey. My role was to research other surveys, find out their methodologies. One of the specific tasks I remember was the methodology for anonymizing data, because it's not just one straightforward method. You might take a variety of approaches. While I was doing my master's, I was so desperate to find a research job outside of ISA, like many of your students probably have and will continue to do. I widened my search online to just simply put the word research. I stopped trying to search sociology or psychology because I just couldn't find anything. Certainly where I was living and certainly at the level I was at, couldn't get anything. So I just put research. And I happened to get a hit from a local company in Essex, and they turned out to be what's called a proxy voting company. What they do is they will write reports for shareholders, institutional shareholders, particularly activist shareholders, on the behavior, results, and policies of a company, specifically in around what are they paying their executives. And this was my first foray into research outside of sociological inquiry. And as I said earlier, it was during this when I realized that there are parallels, that actually an understanding of sociology, an understanding of society, and an understanding of how collective thinking can impact on various spheres in life helped me understand this idea of corporate governance and helped me understand, well, actually, it's quite important. There's a lot that can be done, and actually what I learned at university is directly applicable and incredibly helpful.
Excellent. So were you interviewing people or conducting surveys of pre-existing data?
It would be, so to try and invoke some of the methodological terms of the students. At the time, it was qualitative research of secondary data with splashings of quantitative. The splashings of quantitative were almost purely descriptive statistics rather than predictive statistics. So no regressions or anything scary like that, rather just X% of Y did something. Or the male to female ratio of the board is whatever. So the way that particular job worked was companies have to release annual reports. They have to tell the world what they're doing. But what they like to do is bury certain things throughout the reports, sometimes in numbers and sometimes in a great big paragraph of guff that you have to unpack. And so it was that qualitative skill that helped primed me to be able to read vast swathes of nonsense, but particularly to be able to pick up on key themes, to be able to extract the themes and codes that were underlying the words, and crucially to be able to take large amounts of data and create an understandable narrative for people who perhaps don't speak that language. And what I learned at, on the psychology and sociology course in qualitative methodologies, I couldn't have done it without it.
It's nice to hear. I think that's particularly a key skill, is what you might term the translation ability from academic jargon into plain English, which is something that's very much an acquired skill, but a very important skill. Too many people get trapped in a kind of academic bubble, and they seem to lose the ability to communicate with, I was going to say, normal people.
You do. I did it as well, because when you're studying it, if you really want to do it, you want to emulate the people that you're reading, and the people that you're reading talk not normally. I keep my language clean for this, but they why use one when 1,000 words will do, right?
Yes.
And so you emulate that, and you want to pontificate, and you want to sound fancy, and you want to sound intelligent. So you write with all these flourishes that are completely unnecessary. Funnily enough, it was my studying of quantitative methodologies that probably most informed my qualitative. And by that I mean, it's easy to get swept up in the or the beauty of writing qualitative stuff or reading it, but you are taught in quantitative. You need to make this you need to boil it down to a single output if you can, and people are not. People cannot understand the formulas. People can't understand the jargon of quantitative studies. So it's up to you. You have to make it simple. And when I took that principle and I applied it to qualitative, did things start to improve then?
Excellent. Practical question was posed by one of the students when you were being interviewed for your, well, their question was about your current job, but you could answer this in terms of any of the jobs you've been interviewed for. Were you asked to demonstrate your knowledge of research methodologies, statistics, etc., kind of during the interview? Did they put you on the spot, or was it a more typical type of an interview?
I've had both. So right now I work for a company called PwC. They're one of the largest professional service firms in the world. It stands for PricewaterhouseCoopers. Anyone who knows anything about company auditing will have heard of them. And I work in executive compensation here. I consult and I help companies do all the right things. My interview process for PwC was fairly straightforward, really quite conversational, actually. Nothing really in the way of having to demonstrate the practical skills. But this is a grown-up company. I've had applications for and interviews with and subsequently rejected offers from less grown-up companies, and some of them will be much more adamant that they want to watch you do things. I had one video interview like this where they suddenly told me, okay, now you're going to work on a spreadsheet, and we're going to give you a brief, and we're going to watch you do it, and you've got 10 minutes. And yeah, I mean, I can understand why. You'd want to see someone write formulas. You want to see what their skills are. But it wasn't very pleasing to me to be sort of ambushed like that.
Yes.
What they tried to do was defend themselves by saying, well, we want to know that you can work under pressure. And I thought, well, you can sort of see the logic, but I didn't enjoy that. Fortunately, I had other options. So the answer to the question is, yeah, sometimes they are going to ask you to do things. So keep sharp on your skills. You have to be good. You never know when they're going to just pull it out their back pocket, and you may have to do it. In terms of but that's in terms of skills. That's not in terms of methodologies. In my experience, I have not ever been asked to demonstrate knowledge of research methodologies. Rather, but I haven't asked about them because I list them. I'm proud of the fact that I know my qualitative methodologies. I'm proud of the fact that I know my quantitative. I put them front and center on my CV. I explain that I know how to use Stata and SPSS, and I can do critical discourse analysis and so on. Sometimes they'll ask me about it, but no, I'm not asked to demonstrate my methodologies. However, if I were going for an academic position, I expect I probably would be.
Indeed. I'm glad you mentioned SPSS. That was going to be one of the points to raise. Again, students have asked, are there particular computer packages these days that are in the field of employment rather than the field of academia much more in demand, or in terms of regular usage and being competent with how to use those particular types of program?
Yeah, again, I can only talk about the industry that I work in, which is not the academic industry. But I was taught SPSS at my undergrad. I was taught Stata at my master's, and I've used neither of them ever since. What we use and what my industry seems to use is simply as Excel, and almost exclusively as Excel. Or variations of, such as Google Sheets or whatever they call their version of Excel. It's quick, it's powerful, it's easy, it does everything that we need it to do. However, I know of a client that uses Python. So it would appear that perhaps some of the financial services industries, banks, will do a lot of their research in Python. I suppose the key here, though, is I couldn't have taken to Excel as easily as I did had I not had a background in coding, which I got from Stata, and I couldn't have taken to Stata very easily if I hadn't have already experienced quantitative software in the form of SPSS, and I definitely couldn't do any of my modeling that I currently do. So we do quite a lot of financial modeling. I couldn't do any of that if I hadn't have sat through those lectures, those first year quantitative methodology lectures where you're told about standard distributions, and well, this is a histogram and this is an x-axis and a y-axis. It seemed the most dry thing ever at the time. But if I hadn't have been grounded in that and just simply understanding the foundational terms, I wouldn't have been able to go on and start to do some of the more complicated modeling that I do now.
So it's worth the suffering.
Yeah, it is. It really is. Although, I mean, it was it was suffering. Only parts of it were painful for me. I knew how I could see how painful it was for many others. I liked a lot of it, but it was just, I remember just seeing a wall of a wall of equations and language and signs and symbols. It didn't make any sense to me, and it was very, very scary. But once I cracked it, it was absolutely fine. But I think it's somewhat your personality. I remember after being given a guitar when I was very, very young, the second I could just play a couple of chords, I wanted to play music. I wanted to make some songs. Whereas you've got some people who learn all the scales and never really make a song. I was just sort of creative, and I wanted to apply it. And it was a very similar thing with quantitative methodologies. As soon as I learned how to do a t-test and I could understand the idea of a correlation,
Yeah.
the minute I had that, my synapses were firing. Well, what can I think of in terms of a research piece where I can show a relationship? And
Yeah.
I think if you've got that fire in you, it's much more necessary to take on the tools, but you're much more accessible and ready to take on those tools.
Absolutely. Enthusiasm carries through with a great deal of things.
Yeah.
In terms of your experience in any of the positions you've been in, including studying for the Masters, what would you say are the best and worst, the highs and lows of research activities you really enjoyed and others that you wish you'd never done in the first place?
Oh, it's a good question. I think sometimes the highs can be just so simple as completing something and reminding yourself that, because you're under the cosh for such a large percentage of what you're doing, such a large percentage of your studies, you've got deadlines looming, or you're in the middle of a project. Just the sheer act of completing something, anything, regardless of how big it is, whether it's your final dissertation or whether it's a mid-year project, it always helped me kind of realize that I was gaining traction and still going. So the lows, I think, were always the time it took to do things, the difficulties I had understanding things, but the highs were simply just the accomplishments. And especially if you get a good grade for something, it makes you feel wonderful. And it's difficult. It's easy to say if you get a bad grade, learn from it, but it's hard because you put a lot of time and you put a lot of work into it. Or at least I hope you do. Yeah, so I don't think there's any specific highs or lows really. For me, it was, you see, for me, going to university was always a utility. It was a utilitarian move. I wanted to use it vocationally to get on and do something. I didn't want to just learn it in the abstract. I wanted to actually take it and forge a career, using it. So I was always very, very time conscious. I was late doing my degree. I was in my late, we had all sorts of ages, but I was in my late 20s. I'd done a lot of other things in life before coming back and doing my degree. I was in my 30s by the time I got my master's, and I was in my 30s when I got my first, professional job. I was always acutely aware of time passing me by and how long it was taking. So that was probably the low, I would say, and the high was just simply completing it and getting it done.
An encouragement to the listeners to get things done.
Yeah,
chase those endorphins.
You've got to. You break things down into bite-sized tasks and get a little win every single day. You need a win. It sounds a bit strange and it's a bit preachy here, but I get up in the morning. Every morning, I make my bed. As soon as I'm out of bed, as soon as I wake up, I'm up. I don't lay in bed. I get out of bed and I make my bed, and it just starts my day right for me.
You've been reading Jordan Peterson?
No, I haven't. But, I'm glad to hear that we're aligned on that.
Go back to your master's degree. Was there anything when you started on the master's degree, anything you felt you wished you'd known or hadn't been covered at the bachelor's level, where you sat there thinking, oh, if only we'd done this, or you know, if I hadn't missed that lecture, I'd have known about such and such a thing or whatever.
No, quite the opposite, Robin, actually. I had a good friend at UCS Bury with me, Kit, if you remember Kit. Now, Kit and I both applied to go and do sociology at the same time. We'd both done the same course at Bury, and we both went to Essex. And we were both trepidatious. We were both worried and concerned for that very reason. You know, Bury is a very small university. Essex is, by contrast, a very big university. And we were genuinely scared that we weren't going to know anything. Quite the opposite. We got there and we knew demonstrably more than others. It was pitched, I would almost say, at too low a level. The quality and depth of the knowledge and education that we got at Bury surpassed Essex by quite a long way.
I'm going to have that printed out and put up on a poster.
It's true. It really is. There's a lot to be said for small class sizes. There's a lot to be said for lecturers that want to be there. And honestly, going sociology from Bury to Essex, there's absolutely nothing that I wish I'd have learned more of. Because obviously you choose your modules. I chose quantitative modules as much as I could there. It was hard to get into that. That was pitched at the correct level, but it wasn't, impenetrable. But the qualitative stuff, no, absolutely. The theoretical stuff, no, absolutely. It was better at Bury. So anyone who wants to go from Bury and do a master's, you will excel when you get there.
We aim to keep the standards up. If there's any students listening to this who are really struggling with research and methodologies and so forth, is there anything you would recommend or suggest to them to give them that sense of accomplishment and rush and struggle through it?
Work with others. We worked in teams. I always bounced ideas. Kit was my best friend at uni, and he was incredible to have because we would bounce ideas off of one another, things we didn't understand. So don't put yourself in a dark room and try and come up with the right answer. That's never going to work. Whether you think you're good at it or not, work with other people. Sometimes if you find that it's being pitched at too high a level, you've got to be proactive. You need to go and do your own research, but there will be resources out there that explain things in a slightly different manner. It may be that it's not pitched at too high a level. It may just be the wrong style. You may need to just see it more visibly or hear it differently. So don't just stick to the resource that you've been given by the university. Don't just look at the lecture slides or just look at the book. Go and research it. Go and have a look. See if someone else can explain it in an easier, more comprehensible manner for you. You see, the theme emerging here is always self-starting. If you are the kind of person who is very passive and just wants to receive, you're likely to stumble. You're likely to come across hurdles that you can't get over. You've got to want to do these things, and then inevitably you almost always will. Speak to the lecturers. Don't be scared to just. How many times, Robin, did I come to you or to Rachel or to John just to pick your brains about anything, research ideas, or what does this mean? What does that mean? Because they will always inevitably, the lecturers know more than the students, and inevitably they will give you another book, a recommended reading that perhaps isn't on the syllabus. So I suppose the long and short of that is, if you're butting against something, go around it. Go and find a different route.
Excellent, thank you. Do you think you'll stick with research in the future as an ongoing career, or will you consider other directions eventually?
Well, I suppose as I've said, it's not that I'm so much in research. Research is simply a skill that I employ on a daily basis. I don't work in a research job per se. I work in a consulting job, and yes, I'm very happy in it. I'm very happy with what I do. Probably there will be a time later in life when perhaps I might wish to do something a bit less corporate and a bit more personal interest fulfilling. Who knows what that might be? But because I enjoy research, because I've always enjoyed the research skills, I've always enjoyed the research methodologies. I'm very happy being in an area in which I can utilize that in any capacity. And I suppose that's the key to remember. Back when I couldn't find any apprenticeships or jobs or anything going for social research, I had to realize that, or maybe I need to go around it. Maybe I need to try some different things and transfer my skills and utilize them rather than just trying to forge ahead where jobs didn't exist. I tell you, it wasn't until I finished sociology that I realized there's not really any such thing as being a sociologist. You can't just go and be one. Because sociology is a field that is made up of so many constituent parts, be it economics or statistics or think tanks or whatever, philosophy, it's very difficult to just go and be a sociologist. So that was a great learning curve for me.
It does open up a lot of doors into other areas.
Yeah, you'd be surprised what doors it will open. You really are. So you go on, you use the resources online, and they'll say, oh, you could work for the UN, and then we all apply to the UN, and none of us get it, and then we all apply to MI6, and none of us get it, and it's nonsense. Unfortunately, the resources out there for being able to transfer sociological skill or psychological or historical, I always found them quite lacking. I was quite lucky to have found the path I did, and so that's why it's so valuable for me to come and let you guys know that there are paths. Don't just look at what's online, because it's not all. That's not everything. Most jobs you wouldn't be able to just, they don't exist to be Googled. You have to sort of get in at one bit and then get knocked around and pinball your way to the job.
Sounds like life, really.
Isn't it, Jess? Yeah.
The pinball machine. One of the issues that gets flagged up by a lot of students, especially within sort of level 4, the ones starting out for the first time, is the degree of maths anxiety that a lot of people have. It can be very off-putting for a lot of people. Do you find yourself using an enormous amount of maths in your current post?
Yeah, descriptive statistics are everything. Predictive, less so, but descriptive statistics are everything. So if you think about what I do, I report on how companies are acting and how much they're paying their executives. Now, one of the buzzwords in my world at the moment is the CEO pay ratio, or the gender and the gender pay gap. So what I have to do is calculate what does the CEO earn, because individuals are paid across many elements. You don't just get one pay. You don't just get a salary. You get bonuses, and you get share payments, and you get pensions and benefits and cars and all of that stuff. So you have to accumulate all of that, calculate it the appropriate way, as judged by the regulatory bodies, and then you have to create ratios to say, well, what does the CEO get paid versus the average employee? And we end up with this one single output. As I said earlier, you get this one single output, and it usually says something like 150 to 1 or so, and that's your ratio. Your CEO is earning 150 times what your average, your median average employee is. Now, I have to know what median is. I have to know the difference between mean and median. I have to be able to rank. I have to be able to create quartiles. I have to be able to check standard distributions to make sure that the populations I'm looking at and the numbers I'm looking at are what I think they are. All sense checks, and this is all descriptive statistics. And it's the same with the gender pay gap. So I use the maths, and I use the notions and the abstract ideas that you learn in that first year, which seem incredibly difficult, but I do use them, and they are important because we need to know that when the high earners are increasing away from the average, we have an increasing level of inequality in this country. So what we do is we try to combat social inequality, just us, through that corporate world, through trying to curb and curtail executive pay. So maths is a big part, but it's weird. It gets easier as you do more. I remember in the first year we were forced to learn the equation. We had to write the equations by hand and then calculate our whatever it would be, our standard deviations or our regression outputs by hand, which is the hardest thing I've ever done mathematically. I've never done anything harder than that. It starts really, really hard, and it just gets easier and easier and easier as you go. So yes, the maths is used. Yes, the maths is valuable. Yes, the maths, if you haven't been exposed to it before, yes, the maths is difficult when you first get to it. But give me something that isn't difficult when you haven't done it before.
Absolutely.
You can't shy away from everything that's difficult. You've got to give it a go, especially if that's what you want to use, if that's what you want to do. But again, when it's difficult, check your resources.
I'm quite glad you mentioned doing things by hand, because a lot of students, I think, almost think it's a form of sadism, which of course it is a form of sadism on my part. There's clearly a purpose to that sadism beyond amusing me, in that it is a skill that sets a sort of
it really
parameter from which, yeah.
Absolutely, because if I have to do a regression model, for example, let's say, I want to predict something. Something's on a linear scale, so I know it's going to increase linearly. I want to predict where it's going to be at a certain time based on a certain predictive input variable. Well, if something goes wrong, or I get an output that doesn't quite look right, well, if I don't know how the equation is doing its job, well, I'm just going to take that verbatim and I'm going to serve up poor data, or I'm going to come to a wrong conclusion. That's not scientifically accurate. That's not good for anyone. It's not good for anything. Whereas if you see something that's gone wrong, or you get something that looks a bit strange, it just feels a bit wrong, you can reverse engineer your equation. You can reverse engineer what you've done, where you've done it, and you can go and check exactly what the heck is going on. So yeah, it's very important. It's learning to walk before you can run. You've got to, or I suppose because it's hard at the beginning, it's learning to run so that you can walk, I suppose. But yeah, it's I remember it was hard. It was hard at the beginning.
But as you say, it does get easier.
It does. It really does. It really, really does. And the quantitative skills are so sought after. In if you want to get in, if you want to go to work, and you want to go and just get a job and get into something, I don't know what you want to do. If you want to go out and get into the professional world, become an analyst, become a research analyst, or work in marketing, modeling their responses, or work in my world, in the sort of financial world, you're always going to be surrounded by numbers, and so quantitative is really, really sought after. I now, the majority of the people I work with are actuaries. They're born and bred in numbers, and I hold my own because of that hard work I did in that first year when it was difficult.
That's a nice positive note to end on. thank you for your time. Much appreciated.
Oh, you're most welcome. It's my pleasure.
And perhaps if any of our students come up with questions, then they can email them to me and I can bounce them off you and let them know what the answer is.
Yeah, I'd love to, because it is worth noting that although I now work in the corporate world, I still read books such as Key Sociological Thinkers.
Hey.
What's the author? Is it Stone that wrote?
Oh yes. Yeah.
Stone. I think it is. I still read my Foucault. I still maintain my interest in the philosophical side of things. So I haven't just sort of down tools and gone and become a corporate shill. I've maintained it as an interest, and I utilize it, or as we say in my world, I leverage it. Get ready for that. Learn your corporatisms.
Oh, a whole new language.
Yeah.
I shall stop the recording now and say thank you very much. And I might have to do another recording about some other related subject on another occasion.
I'd love to.